Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello everybody, welcome back. So this week's project is going to be kind of a Thanksgiving-ish inspired because this video should be airing just before Thanksgiving, I believe. And so first I'm going to show you my fabric. It's very pumpkin-ish. It's just one of these little 100% cotton, seasonal prints, but it's fun. It's fun. It's a nice weight. I have, like I usually do, pre-wash it on hot, pre-dry it in my dryer on a hot temperature, just because I want to get all of the shrink and sizing and everything out of this before I start cutting out my fabric. So that is all done. And when I'm going to pre-wash something, I do run in row of serging. I know it's not balanced, that doesn't matter at this point, but I do run a row of serging down the edge just so that it won't unravel while it's going through that process. Now here is my pattern. It's just a cute little blouse. And there's a few different sleeve options and collar options and things. And I am going to be doing basically this one. And the difference is this has, a little collar. But this option, well, maybe you can see it in the drawing here. It's got these funky little ruffles right above those gathers. Not really a fan of that. And then also the very, very long cuffs. I think those are beautiful, but for a blouse that I'll probably be using like while I'm in the kitchen and stuff, rolling up really long cuffs can sometimes be a pain. So I'm just going to do the standard length cuffs. And this comes in two lengths, and you can kind of see on the back, this one is a lot longer, this one is shorter. So I'm going to be doing the longer one with the long sleeve, short cuff, no ruffle on the front, and I think that's about it. So let me go ahead, open up my pattern, and see what it has for us. So I've just opened it up, and I am, again, doing view A. So I'm looking at it, and it looks like on the bodice front and back pieces, they have the different cut lines for the shorter length and the longer length. But the thing I was thinking that it would probably have a one sleeve that just had a shorter length. And they don't. They have two different sleeves. So here's the thing. This sleeve, that is like this, the longer one, is much narrower than this sleeve, which has the longer cuff. I personally like really, really full sleeves better than narrow sleeves. So I may actually be doing a little bit of improvising here, either by splitting this sleeve open and fanning it out so it's closer to this width, or maybe just lengthening this piece to fit my length that I want. I have not figured that out yet. The other option that I could do is, if I want more of like a 3/4 length sleeve, which honestly is not a bad option, I could use this sleeve with this cuff, with the shorter cuff, or just take this one and cut it shorter. And that way I have the big full sleeve that I want, but the shorter cuff that makes me happier too. So let me get this unfolded, get a look at the pieces themselves, and then I can make that choice at that point. At this point, I am going to be cutting out my standard size 16. I think that that's going to be just fine for this. Okay, so I have enough of this cut out that I want to show you my situation with these two different sleeve options. All right, so this is the wider sleeve, piece number 12, and it is extremely wide. I'm going to put the other sleeve on top of it just so you can see the difference. So if I match up the center dot up here, which is right about there, okay, I don't know if you can see, this is wider that way, this is wider that way. This sleeve, the narrower one, would fit my arm. It would give me, you know, a couple inches of ease. But I am just drawn to the excessively wide one. So I think that is what I am going to do. This sleeve is extremely wide. It's going to be very poofy. And so if just from cutting line to cutting line of my size 16, well, there are pieces where it will barely fit in the folded fabric. I think at the bottom, at the width for my size, it's about 23 inches, okay? So I may just squish it in if I need to get it cut out of my fabric, and I will show you that. But here are my two sleeve options here. This is the sleeve that's the shorter one, okay? So when it's all said and done, it is folded in half this way. For the longer cuffs, okay, they are here. And what I wanted is to see how much wider the longer cuffs were, because they are going to be riding higher up on my arm. And, well, I'm comparing the wrong size to the wrong size here, but it looks like these are about 3/4 of an inch wider than these are. So here I can actually match up the right size here. If I match this up here, no, it's even more than that. It's probably closer to about 1.5 inches difference. Okay. So if I do use this shorter cuff piece, I want to cut this rectangle to be 1.5 inches wider than it is right here, just so I have plenty of room for it to close up here higher on my arm. Okay, so it looks to me, you know, trying on a tissue paper, that it actually would be fine if I just left it as is. Let me try that one more time just to make sure. Yeah, I think it'll be fine. So I'm actually, you know, learning on the fly here. I'm going to use my wider sleeve and this cuff because I can. Okay, so I'm trying to get this whole piece into my camera view, and I don't know if I can. But I think you'll be able to get the idea if I just show you one side of it, okay? So here's the thing. If I lay my super wide pattern piece down, it's too wide to cut out on a fold. And I want to cut it out on a fold. I think that would be lovely. In the pattern instructions, they have you cut them out in single layers. Let me see if I can even find it here. So for using this big piece number 12, they have you do it in single layers. All right, because I'm kind of, you know, all over the place with the sleeve thing, what I'm gonna do is make this piece fit. So I wanna make sure that up here at my center top, I'm just kind of holding that with my hand, and this will work if the top of your pattern corners, oops, right here, are inside the fabric on each side, okay? If it's not, well, you can probably still do it. It's just gonna be less gathers up here on top, because you can see this is a very wide sleeve cap, so there's gonna be gathers on top. But anyway, I'm holding this here, and I'm just making a little pleat on the bottom, okay? Just doing that so that over here, if I can tip the camera again, my cutting line is going to be on the fabric. It was moving on me. Okay, and the same thing, if I can move this on this side. Now my cutting line is inside. I'm taking out some of the width at the bottom, but that's okay. This is a very full sleeve. I don't think I'm going to miss that little bit on the bottom, but the top of my pattern is going to be, you know, the same. And you can see on the envelope that for this version, there is quite a bit of gathering going on up there. Whereas for the other version, it's more of just a set-in sleeve cap with no gathers. Okay, so anyhow, that's how I'm going to make this piece fit. Okay, welcome to another day. I am going to get started sewing this morning, and I've got it all cut out here. The only thing I had to cut a little wonky was the band. I have it actually cut sideways, which normally wouldn't be a really big thing, but you know, this is a directional print, so on that little collar band, my pumpkins will be sideways, but that's okay. It does have a collar, and the collar is going to be hiding the neckband, so I'm not going to worry. I pulled out the machine I'm going to use today. I'm using Daria, my little very, very old Singer 15 treadle. And when I just wanted to show you this real quick, when I get the machine out, I usually have two different color threads. I'm going to be using black, but there was a green bobbin in. And that just makes it a lot easier for me when I throw my scrap of fabric in there and make sure that everything is right. Because that way, you know, in addition to feeling it and making sure that it feels right, you know, no bumps and everything. And you can do the diagonal popping method. I do that a lot too. But I can look and see, okay, do I see the little black flecks right there? Yeah. So then I can come back and tighten the tension on the top one. And it's a lot easier to see what is what when you have two different color threads. So that's just that for the day. So let me get my directions out here, and we're going to see where they're going to have us get started. It looks like it is going to be stay stitching. So I need to get my yoke pieces. There's the lower part of the blouse, and then there's the upper yoke. And it looks like we're going to be dealing with these upper yoke pieces. So let me get both of those out. Okay, so over here at my ironing board, and right off the bat, I see something I'm going to do slightly different. And so this is what they're asking for first. Stay stitching of the front neckline and the back neckline. Now this is going to have a collar band and collar on it. And to me, putting on a collar band and collar is so much easier with a smaller seam allowance, okay? With 3/8, you know, even a 1/4 inch seam allowance is so much easier working a collar band on than 5/8. And I can tell by the placement of this dot, which is the dot for my sizing here in the front, that they are going to want that at 5/8, okay? I'm going to be trimming it later. But because I want to make sure that my stay stitching, or stay reinforcement I should say, is not going to interfere with that collar band seam, because it's really easy to get those, you know, slightly off center. And I will come back and mark all of these things in a bit. Don't worry about that. What I'm going to do is, instead of doing stay stitching, I am going to be using stay tape. And I need to turn my iron on. This is the one I'm using. I bought it off eBay, I believe. But it's a woven fusible stay tape, which takes the place of stay stitching, okay? And I'm going to fuse it on, leaving about 1/4 inch between the edge of my tape and up here. And that way, when I come back and I trim off that 1/4 inch, so I can get a 3/8 inch seam allowance, you see? And I have this tape on here. It's going to do the same job as stay stitching, but there's absolutely no way I'm going to have a line of stitching visible from the outside. I know, long-winded to get started, but I need to get my iron heated up. I'm going to get this fused on, just like this, to both of my front pieces. The back piece is cut on a fold, and I'll be fusing it on here the same way by setting it in about 1/4 inch. This stay tape is 1 centimeter, no, 1/2 inch. It's a 1/2 inch wide, so that's going to work out really well. So give me a few minutes to get all this done, and Actually, I'm just thinking, once I have my stay tape fused on, I'm going to go ahead and serge all the way around all of these edges, because this is, you know, just 100% cotton woven calico kind of thing, and I don't want it to come unraveled in the wash, so I'll be doing that, and then we'll put the markings back on. So now that I have the stay tape fused on, I'm going to go ahead and transfer my markings over. Oh, and I have serged the edges, and when I serge the edges, I try to be really careful not to cut off fabric, just to skim the actual edge and overcast it so I'm not losing any fabric. I'm keeping the piece the original size, okay? And if you've never seen, the way that I mark like my circles is I punch them out of the fabric using a piece of leather. This is a Grand Hotel coaster from many years ago, and a leather hole punch. I just push it down, that punches out the hole there. I think that's the only circle on this piece. So since I already have this open, I also use a heat erasable pen. So you can grab one right here, and that way I can just reach through, fill in that little circle, and it's all done. If you have a busy print and it's hard to see, you might want to make a bullseye out of it, because then it really sticks out. As far as the notches, I usually actually like to cut my notches before I serge, and since I didn't this time, I'm just going to come back with my little pen and draw little lines. Now I can tell you, up here at the neckline, I am eventually going to be trimming it all the way down to the edge of my stay tape. Not right this second, but eventually, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and transfer that little line there for right now. If I was to clip my notches right now, which I could, you know, and I do sometimes, the only problem is by clipping it now, it clips through my serging, and then it tends to unravel a little bit and is not quite as neat. So this is how I'm going to mark it. I think the front piece has a couple circles to punch out. And again, this is the one. I'm doing size 16 here, and you can tell the distance between the midpoint of my size and the cut edge is the seam allowance. 5/8 of an inch. That's how you can tell. So I'll be transferring over these two dots. This is for view B and D. That's for the ruffle I'm not doing, so I'm not worrying about that one. I'm also going to try to transfer over some of these fold lines just so I can keep track of them for later. Yeah, they should be 1 inch from the outside edge. 1 inch from the outside edge, huh? The top one is, the bottom one was a little off. It can't hurt to, you know, gauge yourself again. This should be just over 1 inch. So about 1 1/16 inches for the second line. So there we go, and that looks about right. Okay. So those are my two fold lines. That's going to mark, the first one is for interfacing, and then it's going to look like that, you know, but I just want to keep those handy. So let me go ahead and finish marking up my front pieces, just like my back. Okay, so the next step, now that everything is marked here, is to sew the yoke front to the yoke back. So here is my back piece. I'm going to grab one of my fronts, and we're going to be sewing it up together at the shoulder seam up here, and this little side seam right there. Come on now. Like that, and both of them are going to be at 5/8 of an inch, and then press the seam allowance open. So I'm going to sew both of my fronts onto that. So this is the machine I'm using today. This is Daria. She is a Singer 15 from 1895. She's an old girl. She's a treadle machine, so nice and peaceful stitching. Now, she is an old girl before they put reverse in, so I just go forward a little bit, move it up, and then start over. That's how I lock it in. You get to the end, do it the same thing, lift it up, move your fabric a little bit, and then you can just stitch over those Same stitches, and there you have it. It's all backed up, ready to go. So yep, I'm going to be using her. I have never put my automatic buttonholer on her before, so I'm excited to see how that goes later on. Okay, so now this is what it looks like on the outside. You know, it's such a busy print that seam line kind of gets lost in it. But I've got my seam allowances pressed open, and I'm just going to set this aside for a few minutes and grab the lower pieces of both my front and back bodice. And it looks like we're going to be sewing those together on their sides. But before I do that, I am going to be serging around each piece of both piece 3 and piece 4 separately. Actually, I wanted to show you, I am going to clip these first before I do my serging. I can find my clips underneath my serging. If I know where to look for them, I can find them. But if I don't know where to look for them, they're not terribly obvious. So that's good in a way, that's good. So anyhow, once the notches are clipped, then I'm going to go ahead, open it up, and serge all the way around these pieces. Okay, so these are my 2 front pieces. The front kind of curves upwards like that, and the back is kind of like this, okay? So they're not going to line up on the top exactly, but that's okay. So let me go ahead and, with this as a front, and flipping my back on top of it, I just wanted you to see how they lay together. So it's just going to be the standard matching up the side seams and sewing it at 5/8 of an inch, but it should look kind of like this, where when this is my back, that's my front. So when you sew it together, the front's a lot higher. Okay, that's the orientation. So I'm going to sew both of the side seams up here at 5/8 and then press that seam allowance open. All right, so I've got them sewed together. I'm going to be going ahead and transferring those same fold lines that I did up in the yoke area to the front piece here. And that's basically, the first line is at 1 inch from the cut edge, and the second line is at about 1 1/16 of an inch from the previous one. So I'm just going to use my ruler here and draw those in. I have already pressed my seam allowances open here, okay? Now once I have these in, I am going to need to run gathering stitches, but if you can see on the diagram here, we stop before the notch, okay? So I can see here, this is my notch. I can draw a line, an arrow right there so it's more obvious to you, but that's my notch. So I'm basically going to run 2 rows of gathering stitches from this notch on this side all the way to the notch on the other side. So the first one's going to be, you know, right outside my serging here at about 1/4 inch. The next one will be at about 3/8 to 1/2 inch, okay? Kind of like that. I'm going to run 2 rows all the way across, so you're gathering the whole lower section at the same time. Okay, so I've got my gathering stitches in, and I'm going to need to start pinning this to the yoke piece. Before I do that, I want to mark where my center back is, just so I have a guide point here. So I'm just folding it, getting that little crease, and come on, work with me here. I'm going to put a big arrow there with the letter C. Okay, that is my center back mark. Now, remember, we have all of these markings here. There's my gathering stitches. This is kind of upside down here. So I'm going to flip it this way. And on my bodice, well, my yoke, I should say, remember I have these same little marks here, and here is the notch where my gathering stitches start. So up to the point where the gathering stitches start and everything, of course, it is laid very flat. So I'm just going to pin that on here like this. And then the next point is the side seam. I need to get that matched up. And I hear the FedEx man outside, so let me go grab a package. Okay, so welcome back. It has actually been quite some time since I worked on this. Lots of other projects going on at the same time, but I wanted to jump back on. So what I have right now is I have sewn the lower bodice to the yoke, and that is with, you know, the gathers and everything here. And I have pressed the seam allowance up towards the yoke. Okay, so this is all very nice here. I'm just going to set that aside for a minute because we're going to start to work on the neckband and collar. So there's 2 of each that are cut out, and I need to apply my fusible interfacing to 1 of each. And I want a soft collar. I don't want a really structured, stiff collar. So, you know, I am using my typical, extremely lightweight fusible interfacing. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and fuse a little piece of that to each one of these, and I will be right back. Okay, so the next part is going to be getting the collar band and collar and everything put on. So if you remember when I was first cutting out my pattern, I was saying that this pattern had a 5/8 inch seam allowance for all of this, and I'm going to want 3/8. Okay, so what that is going to mean is that I'm going to need to cut a 1/4 inch off of the entire bottom of my band pieces. I just have them here right sides together. Okay, so I'm going to do that of my band pieces, this bottom edge here first, and around my neckline. Okay, now I put on my fusible tape so that the edge is a 1/4 inch from the edge, so I'm just going to be trimming this right along the edge of my fusible tape, you know, right here, and that'll give me a 1/4 inch off there, and it's a scrap there just to make sure that I stay fairly accurate here. I'm going to line up the top. Looks like it's a little off there, but you know what? We can fix that. And then come back. And with a pin that works, I don't know why this one is not working. Let me switch it out really quick. Okay, so that's better. So now with a pin that does work, I'm just going to come around and mark where that 1/4 inch line is. And you can see when I was ironing my interfacing on, that bottom piece got a little bit wider, but we're just gonna, you know what, I'm gonna trim it based on the shorter one here. And this way they'll end up the same size, you know. So once I have it like this all the way around, I'll just trim that on the bottom, trim my neckline. I'm also gonna need to do it up here on the top because I'm gonna make everything that has to do with the collar 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so on my collar piece here, the side that has notches on it, I'm also going to be trimming a 1/4 inch off of that piece. Not the outside edge, but this piece, or this side of the collar here, and both sides of the band and the neckline. Let me get all that done and I'll meet you back here. Okay, welcome back. It is actually the next day. Again, I got distracted and did not finish last night, but we're at the point where we're going to be putting this collar in, and I've got, you know, one of my bands interfaced, one of my collars interfaced, everything trimmed down to a 3/8 inch seam allowance on the seams that we'll be joining. And I just took a quick look at their directions. You know, it's about time. And I don't like the way that they are applying their collar. So I am going to be putting on my collar very differently than they do. It'll look the same or better when we're done. But what they want you to do is sew the band on, then make the collar, you know, by going like this, and then put the collar onto the band that is on the shirt. I'll show you how I'm going to do it. Basically, we are going to start off with the collar itself. Okay, now this collar, the side that has notches is the side that gets sewn to the band. The outer part is the outside of the collar, obviously. And I have not transferred my markings over yet but that's okay. I will do that shortly. And remember, I did not trim the outside edge of this collar piece. I only trimmed this part where the notches are, okay? So the sides and the top is still a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So what I'm going to do very first here is stitch just this part, not the sides, but just get this pin in here, right here at 5/8 inch all the way around the outside edge. Okay, now I am going to want the side with the interfacing to be the side of the collar that I see from the outside, okay? So again, the interfacing side is my visible side. So it sits on my neck like this. That means that the non-interface side is the hidden side or the private side. And I am going to understitch this right now. Before I do that, I'm going to make some clips here just so it will flex a lot easier. I could pink this, I could grade it. This fabric is so thin, I don't think I really have to do either of those. But I want my interfacing side to be the side that is visible, because if this side is visible, that does not have interfacing, there's more of a chance that that seam allowance, you know, step down and everything could show. It's just cleaner to put this on the right side. So going back over to my machine now, I'm going to open this up. If my fingers will work for me here. Okay. And pushing the seam allowance to the non-interface side, I'm going to understitch it, which means I'm going to be running a row of stitches right here, just to the right of this seam that I just did, making sure it goes all the way through all of that seam allowance underneath. Okay, so here is my understitching. This is the right side, this is the facing side, I guess we'll call it. So now when I turn that edge, it's going to roll over so that all of the seam lines and everything are going to be on the underside, okay? And this is going to make it so I do not have to do that turn it and top stitch it type thing later, okay? But we haven't done the sides yet. Now, just like understitching is going to pull this seam line towards the underside, I want the same effect to be on the sides, okay? So if I fold this like so, so that the understitching, you know, is already kind of curled over, so it looks like this, all right? So this side here with the interfacing on it, I want to be slightly longer than this side, which does not have interfacing. All right, so what that means is I'm going to pull so that at the very bottom edge, I have about 1/8 inch of the non-interfaced fabric peeking out down there at the bottom corner, okay? I'm just gonna pin it here and do the same thing on the other side. So when I come back and I sew this at 5/8 inch, I'm going to go ahead and mark it, and I'm basing that on the outside edge of my bottom piece, okay? So if I sew it like this, when I go to turn it, the interface side's going to be slightly longer, so it will hopefully want to pull towards the back, okay? Let me go ahead and pin this side over here the same way, you know, making sure my seam allowances are reaching around towards the non-interfaced side, okay? And making sure I have a little bit of this fabric peeking out. I'm going to go ahead and go stitch both of these sides 5/8 inch from this point out here. Okay, so now that that is done, I'm going to come in here and trim off. I'm going to trim a little more off just for funsies there of that bulk. And you know what? I'm going to take it down to about 1/4 inch all the way down and flip this over to the right side. Let me get my knitting needle. Poke out that corner. Okay, I'm going to need to go ahead and do the same thing, you know, trim the other corner and poke it out and go to my ironing board and press it. And when I press it, I'm going to pay attention to the way that this top edge is sitting, and this side edge should sit something like this, where this is the back side, you know, you can tell by the understitching. But I see just a hint of that turn right there, okay? So that from the outside, I don't see anything like that. Okay, so this is my collar then. I know the pumpkins look upside down, but when the collar is folded, they will be right side up, you know. I don't think it really matters that much, but that's how it's going to look. So I'm going to set this aside for just a minute and get to my collar band piece. I need to punch out my little marking areas here. Now there is a point up here for a button and buttonhole in this very top band. I'm seriously doubting I ever make that button buttoned. So I might not put that buttonhole in. I might put the button on just for looks and everything, but you know, I haven't decided yet. Anyhow, the first thing I need to do is transfer over these dots and the notches, because dots and notches are going to get important here pretty soon. Because I trimmed all the way around this piece though, I'm going to use my center back point as a landmark. So I'm just going to fold this in half and crease it, get my leather out of the way. Okay, and draw a line up that crease that I know this is my center back. And again, I'm writing on the one with interfacing. Okay, so with that done, I'm just going to place my little pattern piece so I can see that the center is lined up with that mark and that the outside edge is about 1/4 inch smaller, you know. I'm going to put a little circle up here and one right here and right here. This circle is marking the edge of the front. Well, I'll show you. This is where the collar is going to get joined on. This will be for later. This is the one that's important for right now, okay? Now this also has notches. I did not transfer the notches over on this. I should do that, but since I've already trimmed it, I didn't. If you want to put them on before you clip yours, that would probably be a good idea. All right. Let me go ahead and put these circle marks over on this side also. The side of the collar that is going to go up against the interfaced band, okay, and this is the top of my band. This one with the little shoulder dots is the bottom of my band, okay? So the side of my collar that gets sewn to this is the non-interfaced wrong side, okay? So I need to match up where the center of this piece, which is right here, is matched up to the center of this piece. Probably would have been a good idea to mark those things on the right side of my band, but this fabric is so busy. It gets a little bit hectic there. Okay, so I'm going to pin together, matching my center backs first. Then I'm going to come over here to this very edge of my collar, and I'm going to line that up. You can probably see it better this way, so that where this line, this dot is here, let me stick a pin through there. The edge of my fabric of my collar is just going to butt straight up against that pin, all right, but with the cut edge matching up like this, okay? If that makes any sense at all. So let me get that kind of oriented here and pinned in place, all right? So now what we have is this in the middle, and this is curved, and we got a couple different curves going on. For me, the easiest way to match it up is to bend it. So I'm just kind of bending it here in place, and remember that this is a 3/8 inch smaller seam allowance, and the reason for me that I like that is it's a lot easier to manipulate opposing curves with a smaller seam allowance. And by opposing curves, I mean one is going this way and one is going that way, you know. So anyway, get these pinned together here. And I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, so this is how it is temporarily, like this. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing over on this side. I've got my center back. I'm going to match the edge of this fabric here and up against this little dot right there. Okay, so let me get that pinned on, and then I'm going to come back and stitch right along here. Okay, from this dot all the way over here to this dot at 3/8 of an inch. Have it sewn on, okay? And when I sew my next line of stitching, I am going to be looking at this side and stitching directly on top of this row of stitching. So that's how I'm doing this. If you don't feel comfortable that you can stitch exactly on top of that row of stitching when you do your first one, the one that I just did, you can put it out a little bit, which can give you a little bit of wiggle room when you do your second row. I'm fine with this, okay? So I'm going to put that face down for right now, get my non-interfaced collar band and set it on top, get it all matched up and pinned together this way. Now here's one more little thing I'm doing different. They are going to have you sew it to the outside first. I'm sewing mine to the inside first, which means this one that is not interfaced is what's going to get sewn onto my blouse. Okay, the one that is interfaced, I am folding the edge up at that dot level. So at my seam allowance, which is 3/8 of an inch, I'm folding up the edge like this on the very edges. I'm not going to do the entire thing and press it and everything that way. Just this little bit at the side so that when I come and stitch across here, it's going to be already folded up. And I'm going to do that on both sides here. So on this side also, you know, up here at the top, it's going to be matched up nicely. Okay, but down here at the bottom, I am folding up this edge at the level of the dot, okay, which is about like that. And once these are pinned and everything is pinned together, again, I'll be starting here at my seam allowance, which is 3/8, come up, around, and then follow this track all the way across. Okay, so here we go. It's my stitching on this side, on that side. What I need to do before I can turn this is make some clips around this corner so it'll flex easier, okay? Looks like I'm doing about 4 of them, you know, probably putting them about a centimeter or so apart. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this over to the right side and press it so that both of these collar band sides are angled down nicely and this outer edge is a really nice curve like that. So what I'm doing is basically the collar is more flexed, you know, to make it easy on myself. I'm just ironing a bit of the collar and then pressing down against the band. I don't want to iron the entire band because then my little shoulder dots will erase and everything. But just doing it this way, it's enough that it'll keep the collar nice and flat as I'm ironing. But I can also make sure that that little edge is pulled out. Okay. Then the last thing is this little bit right here, and I am going to on this side just press under probably about 2 inches worth, just so that, you know, I have it started well. Okay, so I've pressed under this edge about that far. The rest of it is still open. I'm going to do the same thing over here, and then we can start attaching it to the bodice. We are not going to attach this to the bodice because before I can get to the place where I can match that up, we need to deal with all of this folding and this part here, okay? Because this has to be in this position before I can put the collar on. So let's do glance up here. It is fold, fold, baste, and stitch is what it looks like. So I'm going to go back over to my ironing board. Remember, we have one line at 1 inch in, so I'm just going to fold that and press it all the way down on both sides and then turn it in. It looks like once this is pressed at 1 inch, if I just turn it straight in from there, it'll be on the next fold line. And get this all pressed in on both sides exactly like that. Okay, one more thing I'm going to do differently. I'm looking over here, and this fold comes all the way down to the bottom. I want to kind of incorporate the hemline down there. So when I folded it the first time, the edge of my fabric came to just before that second mark, so it was easy to see where to fold it, okay? The second fold is going to be so that it just turns nicely and I can press this, all right? So let's say that this is all pressed. Now I'm just going to be putting a narrow hem in this down at the bottom, which is about a 5/8 inch hem. So undoing that, I'm going to come back, and for just a little bit here, I'm going to press up a 5/8 inch hem. Okay, I have a little tail here I need to trim off. Okay. So now I can just fold it up like that, all right? So that's easier for me. That way I'm going to have a really nice edge up here to start my hem at. And if you wanted to do a narrow hem where it's turned and then turned again, just tuck it in like this. Actually, I think that looks nicer. If it's not too bulky, I'm going to do that. And that will work. This fabric is very, you know, it's just a cotton calico, so it's thin enough. And then that way, this is the bottom, and the hem is already dealt with, at least at the very edges. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that. When I stitch this, I am going to be stitching it actually twice. I'm going to be doing an edge stitch up the very edge and one at this edge. So I'm going to have 2 rows of stitching, you know, coming down like this all the way. Once I have both sides of this done, I am going to come back and stitch in my hem, which, you know, both sides are going to look like this. So then I'm just going to fold in the rest of my hem, press it, and do a row of stitching right here. And then all of that is going to be done already. Okay, so now that all of this is done, you know, I've got my stitching in there, I've got my hem put in here, all is well. I'm going to go ahead and get my collar put on. So I'm obviously looking at the wrong side of my blouse, and I remember I already cut a 1/4 inch of the seam allowance out of this, okay? So this is ready to go. I have marked with this pin my center back. On my collar band that does not have interfacing, I am going to put a little mark right here where center back is. Okay. So now I am going to put my pin away, pin together the right side of my non-interface band to the wrong side of my blouse, okay? And it's okay if just a little bit of this is going to show. That's okay. If anything, it's going to stabilize it, you know? So I've got my centers pinned together here. The next dot, what I did not transfer over, hang on a second. This dot here, which is right there, that one is the shoulder mark, all right? So if I place this dot so that it is right on top of that shoulder seam, okay, that's where that goes. Let me pin that on. And the final landmark is this part right here, that little corner where everything comes together and this is still hanging out. That is going to line up just barely beyond the edge of my blouse, okay? And I'm saying just barely beyond, because that way I have enough room inside of there to tuck a bunch of stuff in, all right? But for right now, for just pinning it, I'm going to have just a smooch, a smidgen, or whatever of this fabric from this collar band showing at this point. Okay, so let me go ahead and get that pinned on. And then everything in between, we're going to ease it together. So again, hang on, this pin is sticking into my finger. Okay, I think that's pretty good. All right, so looking at it this way, this collar band that's not interfaced probably got stretched out a little bit. That's okay. We're going to make it work. So folding it in half so that the smaller side is on the inside, the bigger side is on the outside. Okay, I'm going to pin that halfway like this. And the same thing here. This probably got a little bit stretched out along the way. You know, things happen. I'm going to be pinning it, folding it in half. And I'm kind of pushing out with my thumbnails at the point where my stitching line is going to be, okay? Because I'm kind of wanting to see how that's going to lay. And it is fairly smooth at that point. So at the halfway point, I'm going to stick another pin right here. Okay, so it's going to look like this. Now that looks kind of scary, but it will work itself out when I'm sewing. And when I sew this, just to make it even easier to work in the extra, I'm going to be looking at this side. So let me go ahead and get this pinned on, and then I'll take you over to my sewing machine to show you how I actually put it on. Okay, so over here at my machine, I'm going to be placing my fabric this way so that the collar and everything is down. And I'm opening up this collar band so that this side is way folded open and out of my way, okay? If I did not have to work a lot of ease-in, I would probably do it the other way, but since I do, here we are. So I'm opening up this little bit, just a hair, so I can see very clearly where that is. Sometimes it's easier to start in the middle than starting on these thick edges, but since this fabric is thin enough, I think I can. So I'm just going to put a few stitches there, back it up, lock it in. Okay. Now making sure that this stuff is in there out of the way. As I'm sewing, I'm going to make sure that my top edge, cut edge here, is even with the collar band edge. And I'm just going to kind of put a little bit of tension on it so that the feed dogs are going to want to work in all that extra. Now on my machine, I can tell because I have one of these old style feet with a little baby toe here. About 1/8 of an inch outside of that baby toe is a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So that's how I am eyeballing this. So I'm just going to continue. This is my shoulder seam here. I'm at that landmark. At each landmark, I'm stopping, unfolding everything, making sure everything is good underneath, and then get going again. Okay, so I'm coming around the back of the neck, which is easy, to a shoulder seam right here. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. Make sure everything underneath is good, and now I'm getting up to that front side on the other side where I have a bunch of stuff to ease in again. So it's just the same thing, just adding a little bit of tension to the top, okay, and letting the feed dogs work in the extra on the bottom. They're magical the way that works, you know. Okay, now coming back up to this side, I want to keep track of where this little point is, right here, okay? So I see that little point, I'm making sure it's just beyond my fabric here. Right there it is. Put my little fingernail there so I can see it clearly. And I'm going to back stitch to lock it in. Okay. So now on the wrong side, okay, I've got it stitched all the way up so that when I pull this over to flip it to the right side, the magic of doing it this way is that when you're doing your hardest stitch, which is the one we just did, that is the hardest one, it's in a hidden place. If you sew it to the outside first of all, it's a lot harder to get this whole stuff that we just did here with all the gaping and everything. It's a lot harder to get that to get matched up with an interfaced side. It's a lot harder to ease that in. That's step one. But the problem is that if you do that, then to close it up on the inside, you either have to hand whip stitch it or something like that, because being able to machine stitch it is very difficult to get things exact. But doing it this way, this is the right side now. All I have to do is turn up the edge, place it so that it is even with that stitching line we just did, and pin it in place, and then come back and I can machine top stitch that like there all the way across. And I think I'm still attached to my machine there. No. So let me go ahead and get this turned, pinned, pressed, and I'll show you what it looks like before I stitch it on. All right, so I've got it pinned closed now. Okay, so this is my right side, this is my wrong side. You know, a little bit of that tape is visible. That's okay. If anything, it stabilizes it. It is not a problem at all. So now I'm going to go back to my machine and edge stitch it along this edge with my sewing machine. If you wanted to, you could do all the way around the band. I don't feel like that. I'm just going to do this bottom edge. Okay, so my collar is on, and this is what it is looking like. You know, it's not a huge collar, it's just a cute little thing, so that's what we've got here. When I do that final row of stitching, you know, I'm looking at it from the outside because I want to make sure that the outside is lined up right, okay? But what that means is sometimes, if you can look on the inside, I might be right here, I might be right down here, and then coming back up. It's very difficult to get them both exact. But it doesn't matter, because this one on the inside, no one's going to see it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it being up and down just a little bit, because it's not doing anything to hold in any of these that are down here. It's only for holding in this one on the outside. So structurally, as long as this looks good out here and it's doing its job to sew this outside flap down, you're great. Like I said, doing it the opposite way is a lot more difficult, a lot more stress trying to make the outside look good. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that little detour off of their direction sheet, which puts us all the way down here to the sleeve. Okay, now remember, I actually cut out this sleeve. This is their narrower one, and this is their wider one. It's probably going to be put in the same way, except for my wider one, I can tell it's going to have a lot more gathers up at the top. So let me go ahead and put this onto the dress form just to get it out of the way and grab my sleeve and my cuff pieces. Okay, so here's my sleeve, which is kind of a hybrid between the really narrow and the really wide, because remember I wanted to make it so I could cut it out in my fabric space, so it's slightly narrower with this little tuck here. I do have a lot of marks I need to transfer over. Down here at the bottom, there's double circles. That is where the little vent opening is going to be. And it's important that that goes on the back, because if you get that messed up, you have a vent opening on the front of your sleeve, which I have done. I have done on this channel. Wait. Anyhow, I am also going to be clipping this notch, marking the circles up here at the top. There are 3 circles I need to mark, notches. 1 notch always means front. Up here, 2 notches mean back. And again, just so I don't lose track of what is front and what is back, I am also putting a big letter B on the back corner. Okay, so let me punch these up here, get them marked on this sleeve and the other one, and then I'm going to go ahead and serge all the way around both of these sleeve pieces. Okay, so I got my sleeves all serged around and nice and neat there. I'm going to set those aside for a minute because I need to grab my cuff. And remember, I am doing the cuff from this sleeve, but the sleeve part of this sleeve. It'll work out. I need to interface these. I'm using that same very lightweight interfacing that I showed before, and I am going to be interfacing the entire piece. So before I actually do that, no, I'm going to transfer my markings after. If I do it right now, they're all going to disappear, so we don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead, fuse my interfacing to the wrong sides of these two cuff pieces, and I'll be right back. Okay, I have the interfacing fused on. I've got these wrong sides together here. And I wanted to point out my fabric is directional. You know, my pumpkins want to be upright. So the part of the cuff pattern that has the little notches, that's going to be at the top of the sleeve like this. So I put these back on here, making sure that my pumpkins are facing the right way, this way, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and punch out all of my little circles. We've got a few things going on. Where's my punch? Here you are. So this circle is going to be for placement on my sleeve. This one here should be where the side seam is on my sleeve. That should match up there. This is another sleeve opening. Okay. These two here are for button placement. I might not transfer those over because I am taking a cuff piece that's meant to be down here and putting it here. So I might adjust where these buttons go, but that shouldn't be a big deal. And the only other thing is this line, this fold line is exactly in half. So I can just go ahead and fold it in half and get a crease to do that. So I am going to be marking these on the inside just because I don't think that my little dots will show up on the outside, and I'm going to be looking at the wrong side when I am matching this up to my sleeve. So basically, these three are the ones that I am marking and clipping this top notch. So then I need to flip this over upside down over here, do the same marking, and we can start putting it onto our sleeve. Okay, remember we marked these two dots right here. Let me circle them so they're a little more obvious. They are at 5/8 of an inch in. And what I need to do, because this is where the vent opening is going to go, so we're going to need to stitch a reinforcement line at 5/8 of an inch straight across here. So I'm just putting my ruler at the edge so I can get an exact position of that. Where do they say? Well, they just say to take it beyond those dots. So I'm going to do probably about, 3/4 inch or so beyond the dots on both of my sleeves, just a regular stitch straight across there. Right, so with that stitching line put in, I'm going to clip up to the dots, not cutting that stitching, just up to but not past. And I need to turn this up and under. Okay, I'm going to pin that, and I need to run a row of stitching just right across the edge up here to keep that nicely set. Okay, so that is done there, and now I need to put in the side seam of my sleeves. So just matching them up along the edge, stitching it at 5/8 of an inch, and then pressing the seam allowance open on both of the sleeves. Okay, so my seam allowance is pressed open, and now I have a lot of gathering stitches to put in. So first of all, at the bottom, there's going to be 2 rows of gathering stitches. Am I going to give myself a break? No, they have it going all the way to the edge. So I would say, I'm not going to go to the edge. I'm going to start at about 5/8 of an inch in, okay? Doing a row of gathering stitches in about 1/4 inch, another in about 3/8 of an inch or so, from the edge all the way around here. So starting here, ending here on both sleeves. And then also up at the top, remember we have 3 dots up here. I need to put 2 rows of gathering stitches, just the same as I just said, from this dot all the way over to this dot, okay? Okay, I just realized that I am going to sew these in the opposite of what the instructions say, kind of like I did with the collar, where I'm sewing it to the wrong side first so I can top stitch it closed on the right side. So basically what that means is I need to put my piece, this is the wrong side, here's my little opening here, okay? And these dots up in the top corners, those are matching, it's these right here, okay? They are 5/8 of an inch in on each side. That point is what should be lining up with this cut edge right here, okay? So if I place this piece so it is sticking out 5/8 of an inch in, the dot, which, let me stick my pin, should be right here, okay, which is 5/8 of an inch in from each side, should line up with this little cut corner. I need to move it over just a hair, okay? So I'm just going to pin that there. And here's the thing, if I sew it on, and you can kind of see my pumpkins are like upside down here, but by the time I turn them around and from the outside finish it off, they're going to be going the right direction, okay? So anyhow, I have it pinned here. The dot, which is right here, okay, let me just measure that with my ruler so I can put a new spot over here. That is 4.5 inches from the edge. Okay, so right there is where my sleeve should match up to the side seam. Right here, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and put a pin there. And then carrying forward, again, the dot that should be, and I'm going to draw it this time just to make it perfectly clear, right there, okay? This dot, if I stick my pen through it, I should be able to set it right here into that little clipped corner. So right there, okay? That's where that needs to line up. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin it up here. So now I have it pinned in place. I just need to pull my gathering threads so all this lays nice and flat. All right. Now when I was putting these in, I was looking at the wrong side. So the threads that are on the right side are actually my bobbin threads. And those are the ones I want to pull. They gather easier than pulling the needle threads, in my opinion. So I'm just going to get started pulling on these and work my way around. All right, so now that I have it all matched up and gathered nicely, I'm going to go ahead and sew this on at 5/8 of an inch. So I do use a flatbed sewing machine. You know, sometimes they are a little trickier when you're doing cuffs. But if you have a flatbed machine, the easiest way for me to do it is like this. So I'm looking at the right side. This is the gathers right here. This is the cuff on the outside. And I can just set my presser foot here. And as it stitches, I just kind of rotate my sleeve and it works its way around. Easy peasy. And then that way I can also keep an eye on my gathers and make sure that they're not going to get, you know, wonky. Okay, so with my cuff sewed on, this is what it looks like on the wrong side, okay? So what I need to do is fold it in half like this, and I want to fold it, okay? This is where I just sewed that on, right here, right? I want to fold it in half so that this dot, my original dot, or it's at a 0.5/8 in, from each side. I want that to line up with this folded edge right there, okay? And so you can see like this. There's my dot right there. I'm just going to stick a pin right here, leaving this end laying down flat and everything. What I need to do is put a seam out 5/8 of an inch in from the fold all the way down to that dot. And it's kind of easier to see it if you're looking at it from this side, because that way you can see exactly where that little divot is right there that the seam needs to line up with, this little spot right there, okay? So a stitch here, 5/8 of an inch all the way to the fold. I need to do that on both sides, you know, it's the same thing on each side, lining the fold up with the dot, which is 5/8 of an inch in, okay, and sewing this way. So let me go ahead and put that pin on there really quick. I have already done this on the other sleeve, so I can show you what it looks like. Okay, so this sleeve I've already done. All right, so at this point I need to cut this corner here. If I wanted to, I could trim this also. I think it might be a decent idea actually to pink it. So let me get the pinking shears out of their drawer here, and I am just going to pink off about half the width of that seam allowance. Okay, and do the same thing here. And I need to turn this right side out. Actually, I need to turn my entire sleeve right side out here. Hang on, let me get the cuff done first, and now reach in here and turn the entire sleeve right side out. Okay. So now, looking at it from the right side, here are my cuffs. Where's my stick? Here it is. I'm just gonna make sure that these corners are nice and square up here, and they are. Okay, so now that I can see the right side here, I want to make sure that my fold is in a good place, and the fold should be so that when I turn this edge in by 5/8 of an inch, that's going to line up with where that seam line is, and that looks about right. So just to hold things steady while I'm working, I'm just going to put a few clips around the top here to hold that fold line where it should be. Okay, get these away. So now I can come back and on the right side, fold this edge of the cuff under and just pin it into place so that it is just, you know, at where that stitching line is. So let me put a pin here, and I'm going through all kinds of layers, so it is fairly thick here. Now where everything meets here, this I am tucking in, okay, just tucking it in there, and it's a little bit thick right in this corner where a whole bunch of things are coming together. I'm trying to smush them flat. Okay, and I'm going to pin this down. You know what? It feels a little thick. Let me see what is taking up so much thickness in here. I think it's all of this. This seems to be quite thick. Well, there's no way I can really trim that without risking it popping loose, but I am going to trim a little corner off of the seam allowance since it's going to be tucked inside. See if that helps here. And it does, it feels better. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pin this. So it looks like this. I know it's very busy, but there's my fold line. I am going to be machine stitching at the edge, you know, just inside this fold line all the way around once I have it pinned and pressed into place. I can feel that where all of these gathers are, it's fairly thick in there. I think that if I was using a fabric any thicker than what I am, I would probably grade those seams, but for just some calico, it's fine. Okay, let me finish up getting this pinned on, and then I'm going to edge stitch the cuff right here. Yeah, I think that's it. I could go all the way around the cuff, but I'm thinking I'm just going to go right here and then just press the edge over there. Okay, so I am back up here. I've got my cuffs pressed, and I think that they're going to be fine. So it's time to go ahead and get these sleeves put into my blouse. So here's an armhole. This is obviously the front here, because you know there's the front opening, this is the back. So looking at it this way, just to make sure I put the right sleeve on the right side, I need to find a sleeve that when I lay my bottom armhole seam together, I have a back over here. And look, there's my letter B for back, so I know this one goes here, okay? I'm just gonna go ahead and pin that center bottom seam together really quickly before I flip everything over. Now, on my blouse, I have the little dots marked here, and those should match up with the place where my gathering thread starts, okay? So I can pin this to match up with this dot right here. There are notches in between, so it's a good idea to match those up also. Okay, but this should fit nicely, and it does, okay? So I'm just gonna go ahead and pin it here quickly. Now up at the top, I do have a top dot on my sleeve here, and that's going to match up with the shoulder seam. So I'm just going to place it right up here at the top. And I'm pinning it so that both of my seam allowances are pinned open, because you know, that's nice. And then coming back down again on this side where the gathering threads start is a dot, which will match up to the dot that I put onto my blouse. Okay, and that means this part down here should also match up nicely, and it does. So let me get that pinned, and then what I need to do is pull my gathering threads so that all of this is cinched up and nice and even in here. Okay, so I've got this arm pinned on, and I'm going to start sewing it. And what I'm doing is I'm going to start up here, kind of like where a notch is, where it's still the smooth, ungathered part. Start here, come all the way around at 5/8. When I get to that point again, coming in about 1/8 of an inch, so then I have like a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and proceed all the way around to the next notch, which is right about here, okay? That way I have 2 rows of stitching on the bottom of the arm. So that's the part, well, if something's gonna rip, that's the part that's gonna rip. So you want reinforcement there and here. I've done this one already, so you can see there's the 2 rows at the bottom, 1 row at the top, okay? So once I have that, I could pink this, I could, but since I've got the other scissors here handy, I'm just gonna make some clips up to within about 1/8 of an inch of my second inner row of stitching, just so that this is going to flex a little bit more and make it more comfortable underneath my arm, you know, but that second stitch line is going to really help to reinforce that. So let me go ahead and put this row in and get it up on my dress form, because at this point we'll be ready to start putting in buttons and buttonholes. Oh, welcome to another day. So just to give you a quick recap, it's actually been a few days since I have worked on the pumpkin blouse. I had a whirlwind adventure making a full-length sequined gown, lined sequin gown, that I had to get done in 48 hours. So everything came to a complete standstill. I got that done. My entire sewing room looks like, you know, glitter everywhere. It's like fairies vomited all over in here, because there's like glitter and sequins all over the place. And I vacuumed it twice already. But now I'm ready to get back onto the pumpkin blouse. I don't even remember where we are last time. I see that it's on my dress form, and I have a buttonhole guide just pinned to it. So I'm assuming that's where we are, putting on buttons and buttonholes. I don't even know if I've showed it to you yet on the dress form. I'm going to flip the camera over, show it to you on the dress form, and then we're going to bring it back to the table and place the buttonhole guide on it and just see how everything lines up. Okay, so here she is. One thing I can tell you, well, first of all, my dress form is not my exact size. I need to do some modifications on her stuffing. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But I'm saying that because it is awful snug right here, right here. Now, just to make sure that, you know, we didn't have a disaster looming, I did take it off, try it on, and it fits me better than it fits my dress form. That's why I say I need to rework her stuffing, you know, but that's a project for another day. But I think it's cute. I like the color, very pumpkin-ish, you know, and I like how this little area is with the little gathers there. I think the sleeves are adorable. I like the 3/4 length. So far, so good. I am going to be starting my buttons right here, right above the seam line where the yoke is joined onto the lower part, and then just take it from there down. And on the cuffs, the pattern calls for 2 buttons, and I have enough buttons to do that. So I'm going to be putting 2 buttons on each cuff, but I'm going to be skipping the button that goes here and the button on the very top. I'm never going to use those, and I just don't want to deal with it. So let me take it off of here, and we'll go back to the table. Alrighty, so first thing I'm going to do is actually fold my button guide. Not exactly in half, but fairly close to being in half. It's going to make it easier for me to deal with here. Yeah, that's close enough. Okay. The top part up here, where it says top, that lines up to right here where the little band joins up down there. And I'm just going to hold it there for a minute. So there's supposed to be a button on the band up here at the top, which I'm not doing. This button right here, which I am not doing. And then they want you to start with a button right here, which is fine because that's above where all this thick seam allowance is and everything, so that's good. What I need to do right now is just mark this line where that is going horizontal, which is marking this way where the top of my buttonhole is going to be. Okay, so I've got one right here. Let me just go ahead and pin this on just so it doesn't move on me. Coming down a little further, I have another one starting here. For my buttonholer, I only need to mark the top. I'm using this blue chalk because I'm hoping it's going to show up. I'm also hoping it's going to wash out, you know. That would be nice. It does not want to show up very well in this busy print. All right, plan B, we're going to stick little pins in there with the chalk. Okay, so I got another line here and another one here. The other thing I need to do when I'm marking my buttons is I need to find the center, and I can tell from this stitching line over is 1 inch exactly. Okay, so if I want my buttons to run up the center, which will be, I'm putting my ruler so it is just shy of 1/2 inch, okay? And that way, when I draw the line, because I'm drawing it next to my ruler so it's this way a little bit, it'll come out right. Okay, so I have a point here where those 2 lines intersect, and it's very hard to see. Oh my goodness. Let me see if I can get a different marking pen. The old standby of the heat erasable marking pen is coming back to my rescue here, so that's great. All right, so using the little blue hash marks that I put in from our guide, I just come over and draw it in right here, and then setting my ruler just shy of 1/2 inch on the side and draw a thing. So what I have is a letter T. That's going to mark the starting point and the track of my buttonhole. The buttons I'm going to be using are these little brass colored metal shank buttons. Okay, these are 5/8 of an inch. I don't even remember if I looked at what the pattern calls for. They call for 1/2 inch, so we're close enough. So I'm going to be using these, and I have a buttonhole cam that is 5/8 of an inch. Now I was going to try to run my buttonholer on my Singer 15 treadle, but it wouldn't fit. The way that the lifter lever is behind it, behind the needle bar and presser bar and everything, it would not fit with my buttonholer. So I pulled my old 201 out because I have not used her in quite some time. And I've got her set up on my table with the buttonholer attached. So we're going to let her run with the buttonholer on there and make these. So as far as the cuff buttons, let's see. So it was hard to tell from their diagram. So let me tell you what I'm doing. I am just putting my arm through the sleeve, you know, as I would wear it, because that's going to be the best cheat to make sure that you put the buttons on the right side and the buttonholes on the other side, okay? So I can tell, because this is the normal way to do it here, this is the side that's going to have the buttonholes. So when I hold my sleeve and I flatten it down, okay, the side with the buttonhole is the longer side. So here is my underarm seam right here, okay? The little side that's closer to that underarm seam gets the buttons. The longer side gets the buttonholes. So I am just going to stick a couple pins lengthwise over here. And that looks like that might be good. You know, what I would suggest, put your buttons on there. Well, since they're shanked, it's hard to do it that way. I'm just going to place them upside down. See what looks like a good spacing for the size of buttons that you're doing, and then mark where that line's going to be. And I think that this will work out pretty well there. I'm going to use my pen to also mark this. I'm going to start my buttonhole at about 3/8 of an inch from the edge. So I'm going to put my little cross line here. Okay, just straight down. I know you can't see, but it's right there. I've drawn them. And then coming this direction, I'm just going to line it up where that pen is. Pull my pen away and draw my little T. And then I'm going to put my pen back because this fabric is so busy. It's hard to see it, so that it'll be easier to see when I go and slip it underneath my buttonholer. Okay, so if you haven't been here for a while, or you know, haven't shown the buttonholer honestly in a while, this is the device I'm talking about. They have all different brands. Mine's from like around the 1930s, I think. It's a 𝐥𝐢𝐤 brand, but they have Singer brands, they have whatever. Anyhow, what this makes is a lovely little oval-shaped buttonhole. And all you need is a straight stitch machine. Hang on, let me turn this light on here. There you go. And all you need is a straight stitch machine to do it. It's better if you're using a machine where the feed dogs can drop, because it just makes your life easier. If you're using a machine where the feed dogs do not drop, you're going to need to put a little plate over them, you know, so that they don't interfere, but that's okay. Seems to work better on this fabric if I go around the horn twice, okay? So now I'm going to go ahead and get them started. I need to turn the crank so it is set at the beginning of its circuit, and get my needle lined up at the cross point where I made those T's, those letter T's, and I line up the track of the tall part of the T between my needle and this little mark here, okay? I'm just going to run it through. I have a complete video on using a buttonholer, one of my very early videos, but it's way back there. Do a search on buttonholer, you'll find it. So let me go ahead and get her started. And like I said, I'm going to go around twice. Okay, so there you go. Now I can just lift it up, move it over to the next spot that needs a buttonhole, which is right here. Crank it around so it's at the beginning of its circuit again, right there. Lower my needle, line up my track, and I'm ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead, same system, doing all of my buttonholes. Okay, so now I need to cut my buttonholes open. So I'm using my buttonhole scissors. If you've ever seen them before, that's what they look like. And that way I can just start cutting right where I need to and stop right where I need to here. Okay. And then I like to run my fingernails in here to pull out any of these like loose threads like that will really get annoying while I'm wearing them. So I can just trim those guys off like so. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the rest of my buttonholes. Okay, so now that I have my buttonholes in, straighten you up there, I need to mark where I'm going to be sewing my buttons. So I am just pinning together right up here at the top, just underneath where that band is. If I can stop throwing pins around my room, that would be lovely. Okay, so I'm just going to pin it together up here and come down to the bottom. You know, flap this out and make sure I got my bottom lined up also. Put another pin down here. Okay, now remember, I'm not putting a button at the very, like, probably bottom 10 inches of this, so I think that's fine. So basically, on buttons that go up and down like this, I want to place my button in the very center of it, like so, okay? So I'm going to stick my pin in the center of my buttonhole, okay? And then just go back and forth. I am not too worried about where this line is as far as close to this edge or close to that edge. That doesn't bother me so much. I'm just going to draw a line straight across, because when I come back and sew it, I'm going to use my ruler, and remember this band is 1 inch wide, so I'm just going to go ahead and mark a line 1/2 inch in, so I have a little cross point right there. You can even see that where I need to sew my button, okay? So when I reach through my buttonhole and go back and forth, that's just putting this line on, okay? And then I measure from the edge to put that line on. And then I'm going to come back, obviously, with a needle and thread and sew my buttons on all the way up. Okay, so I wanted to show you, I miscounted how many buttons I have. Just ignore this little thing there, okay? So I'm 2 buttons short, and so what I've decided is on one cuff, you know, this would work great if I only put 1 buttonhole on each cuff, but alas, I did not. So on one cuff, I'm going to put my 2 brass matching buttons, and on the other cuff, I'm going to put the 2 brass-colored plastic buttons, and I think that that's going to be just fine, because hardly ever do you go like that to show people both of your cuffs at the same time, you know, and if you do that, I think you got bigger problems than not having matching cuff buttons, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to go ahead and get those sewn on also. So here it is. This morning I could not think of what to wear with this, because typically I'm probably going to tuck it in or wear it with jeans. But I thought, you know what, black leggings and boots, at least you can get a good look at the length, the overall length, and how wide it is, okay? And because this is a lightweight fabric, I will probably tuck it in when I'm wearing it normally, you know, just saying. So I think that if I was to do this again, I do like having the fuller sleeve, and I do like having the 3/4 length. But I think that what I would do is use the cuff pattern piece from that longer cuff and just shorten it, because it was shaped a little bit differently and it was slightly longer. And I think that just that extra inch, you know, would give me a better fit on my arm. Or, you know, this is just a rectangular piece, just cut it an inch longer. And I think that that'll make up for the difference in the circumference in your arm from down here at your wrist to up here in your forearm, or whatever your body is. You know, every body is different. But I think it's a cute little top. I like it. I think I'll get some use out of it. It looks very Thanksgiving pumpkin pie-ish to me, so that's what it will be. Hope you liked it, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, reality city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.